You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. It's July 29th, 2021 at 7:35 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I was wondering whether anybody had any questions that they wanted me to talk about. AMA, ask me anything, or whether I should just launch into the topic for tonight, which is just the conclusion of the 16 stages. We got through stage 10 in the last talk, and I thought that we would do the last 6 in this one. I don't go too heavily into the last 6 stages because it's beyond where most people's practices are, so it becomes theoretical, which in some ways is less helpful than really trying to make sense out of experiences that you've had that have arisen from your practice. But so I'm just launching in. That's the idea, right? I like the manual of insight that was written by Mahasi Sayadaw, and the translation was that I like is by the Vipassana Metta Foundation. Steve Armstrong was the lead editor on there. Some of you probably know that I have gone a few times to Myanmar and sat with U Indika Sayadaw, and he was one of the consultants on translating sections of this, and also the Venerable Viranani, one of the nuns that was at the center, was responsible for the citations with another woman named Viranani, and so I find it to be quite a useful text, and I think I've said this, or I usually say it because it's part of what happened, but my experience, and the reason that I'm drawn to this particular map or Dharma map is this description of how to proceed toward enlightenment appeals to me, is because before I knew the map, before I'd even read it, my experience of practice led me through it in a way that it was really required virtually no translation in terms of my experience. I remember when I first reported the experience of fruition to Shinzen, he was dubious about it. And so it took actually the experience of reporting it on multiple occasions over a couple of years, and also the changes that he observed, I would think. And so really what we begin to understand as we dive into this movement toward enlightenment, if you're practicing Theravada techniques, you're likely to have the insights that come from practicing those techniques, and you can begin to understand and organize the practice in such a way that it takes you through these cycles. So you come into it, you begin with the insight around exploring sensing experience and mind. You explore conditionality, how the mind moves to object to object to object, and how it collects that those snapshots of mind moments to create the experience that we think of as reality, but we come to know as conceptual reality, from the ultimate sensing experience, the undifferentiated, unattached, unfixated sensing experience, and then creating this working model and really projecting it outward. I was driving on the freeway the other night, and I'd never seen this before. It was quite interesting. The whole side of the car was an animated billboard. and you could see that there were these little cameras mounted on the handles of the car, and the anamorphic lens was such that even though the whole side of the car was illuminated just from one point, it distorted in such a way that it looked like a perfect picture on the side of the car. I wonder what the wisdom of having animated advertisements on the side of cars while you're driving on the freeway. But we've never been a society where we wanted to impede consumption in any way. So that as you're changing lanes, you can abandon driving down the freeway at 65 miles an hour and attend to the animated advertisement for a service nearby. Um, Once we move out of this conditionality, um, and if you go into the manual, you'll see that each of these insights is supported by an in-depth explanation and also the different things to look for. You move into the understanding of the nature of the three marks or characteristics of existence: anicca, anicca, and dukkha. Uh, Not self, impermanence, and unsatisfactoriness. Um, so you touch into this introduction. How tightly do you grip to this idea that there's a self, there's a you that's separate from the experience of sensing that navigates everything? How tightly to grip on the idea that you can find a sense of permanence, of security in some way, and how tightly do you grip on to the nature that you're in a body that's going to live forever and be vital and active. One of the things that's so interesting about this is that as you examine it, of course, it's perfectly obvious that none of that is true. The self experience changes all the time. Your mood changes all the time. Nothing lasts. Nothing has ever lasted, and you've always had known that experience of nothing lasting, which doesn't keep you from grabbing onto it. And you live in a body that's been growing. When you're young, of course, it's just improving. So you have this idea that the longer you are alive, the longer it grows. The more it will improve. Your brain develops, your capacity to experience the world develops. As you hit puberty, the whole world of sensual desire opens up in a way that's different than in childhood. The brain really gets sharp, um, and then you hit your mid-20s and you reach the top of your capacity for cognitive function. You're the most vital that you're going to be, and you sort of soar into this belief that this could go on forever. It would be awesome. And then you hit your late 20s and the body switches and begins to age, and then there's that sort of adjustment to that process. In the beginning, of course, it's fairly slow and you can adjust to it. The change in energy still leaves you with a lot of it. And then you go into a kind of stasis which holds for 10 or 15 years, and you can sort of learn to navigate in that way. And then in the beginning of the 50s or mid 50s, there's another change, and the energy level drops precipitously, and the aging process accelerates at a rate that's alarming. How old do you think you're going to live to be? When I was in my 20s, I thought, I'll live to be 100. But most people don't live beyond their 70s. And in fact, in our country, because of the nature of our for-profit healthcare system, life expectancy is actually shrinking rather than expanding. You have to get both longevity genes, one from each of your parents, in order to live beyond that. And if you get both of them, you tend to live into your 80s or 90s, but not very many people live beyond that. I four. I think the statistic I read was four people in a generation live to be into their 110s or 120s. Four people out of the entire global generation live that long. So the odds are long. You could win the lottery 8 times before you lived that long. So, um, Sasaki Roshi, I think he was a 104, 105, something like that. I went to his 100th birthday at Rinzai Ji. It was lovely. Um, I don't if you've not been there. There's a sitting hall which was completely packed out, and then there's steps that go down into a garden, and the garden was also completely packed with people, and they'd set up chairs, and the chairs were all full, and there was a standing room only. And he talked from the dais um, in his usual manner. We had gone quite a lot up to see teishos, which are the Dharma talks in Zen, both at Rinzai and also up at Mount Baldy. And then what was very pleasant about that is that he wandered around the garden, just taking people's hands and thanking them for coming to the birthday celebration. And he was somebody who could do Shaktipat. Shaktipat is where a look or a touch or something like that creates this intense bliss storm inside of you. And so that was a very pleasant experience to have, which I'd had before with him a few times. When you touch into this sense of not self, sense of impermanence, sense of living in this body that is temporary, then you move into this stage of examining arising and passing, both at a macro level, but then at this micro level, where each sensing experience arises and passes. And as you get into that vibratory energy of that arising and passing, it begins to dissolve the experiences of solidness, and it begins to dissolve the barriers between sense gates. And then it begins to dissolve the barriers between the perception of inside and outside. And when you get into the fifth stage or disillusion, you're super concentrated. Everything is vividly clear, and the ability to locate the outline of the body or the sense of the body in space is lost, and you're just this vibrating energy. People react to that differently. Sometimes it's quite frightening that's happening. I know in the first couple of times it happened to me, I was quite disturbed by completely dissolving into energy. But after a while, you acclimatize to it, and it's just part of the ordinary nature of practicing. And actually, is lively and I find often amusing in the way that it forms. But then you're sort of spit out of that. The ability to concentrate completely vanishes, and you come into this place of it's called the knowledge of the miseries, where you really have to look at how you hold the experiences of self, how you hold the experience of the desire for permanency, for safety, and this belief that you're going to be able to live in this body forever. Christian?
Maybe this is not an answerable question, but is it the sort of knowledge of all that that prevents concentration, or is it something else? Like, is there an order to that?
Um, I don't know the answer to that really. I don't think I've even ever asked it. How long that dissolution stage lasts varies quite a bit from a few moments to a few hours for longer than a day. And then I've always thought of it as the divine joke of all of this, right? It's such an exquisite state that precedes that. Then you're dumped into this place where it really is kind of muddy and dissatisfying. And I guess I would have thought of it as simply the amount of energy that takes no longer being available, so it doesn't happen. But I don't know. Fear, misery, disgust are the English words that are translated typically. Fearfulness, that you realize that actually the sense of self is a sensing experience. It's not permanent. There's no location for it. It doesn't really exist beyond construction in the mind. Impermanence, nothing is actually going to last. Nothing is safe. Nothing is enduring, from the tiniest macro level to all of these macro constructions. There's a quality of ease and liberation in that. You don't have to preserve anything because nothing lasts anyway. And it puts you at this road, this fork in the road. One direction is nihilism, and one direction is this willingness to fully engage, even though you know it's temporary. This works well both at the micro and the macro level. You rush in. I say rush in, I don't really mean that. I think you should go in a deliberate way in connecting to people around you, to creating a social network, but you go into that knowing that it's temporary. You value each interaction because there's no guarantee that there'll be another one, even though you're at an ordinary level able to navigate relationships, navigate places to live, navigate places to work. Um, Misery is often associated with the sadness that comes about from pushing through the illusion of this solidness, this safety, this permanency, the sense of security. And then you come into the nature of being in the body, which will grow old, get sick, and die. Which sometimes you get what you want, but you still lose it. Sometimes you don't get what you want. Sometimes you have to put up with things that you would rather not have to. And then there's this undercurrent, the desire to be delivered from suffering that pulls you out of this inter-reobservation, which is the 10th stage, where you're actually deeply integrating the nature of the human condition, so that the fact that there's no self anymore no longer causes suffering. The fact that things are impermanent no longer causes suffering. The fact that you're living in a human body no longer causes you suffering, although in my experience, you can pick the suffering back up at any time, and it's just as vital as it ever was. Then you sort of come out on this plateau of equanimity, I like to call it, insight knowledge of equanimity toward phenomena is what it's called in the map. That you really do operate from this basis of knowing the nature of the human condition, and you really do at a deep level understand that is how it is, and that there's no real way to be free of that. We have in Buddhism, of course, all of these constructs around rebirth and not and escaping rebirth through the process of liberation. if you look at the Theravada map, it's a 4-path model based on the eradication of the 10 fetters. The first is stream entry, the second is a once returner, the third is a non-returner, and the fourth is an arahat. In each movement from path to path, you cycle through this map. And so the stages at the end are really about understanding that you've come through the first part of the path and you're on the plateau of equanimity. And then what arises is the knowledge that the fruition experience or the cessation experience could happen. And then in some sense, there's the knowledge that it's going to happen. And then there's a break in consciousness because cessation includes the cessation of awareness. And then you come out of the cessation experience and the sense of self and world reassembles, and then you have knowledge that cessation has happened, a knowledge which is knowledge of fruition, knowledge of path, whether you take another path or you don't take another path, depending on what's been eradicated. And then you come into an understanding of what nirvana is or liberation is. And what liberation is then is the removing of all of the defilements, removing of all of the misunderstandings, and being able to abide in the true nature of the human experience continuously without interruption. So that's the intention of the path. And stream entry, which is the first time through, you eradicate the first 3 fetters, which are knowledge and the belief in self, the fetter of self, the fetter of belief in religious ceremony as the path to enlightenment, and the eradication of the hindrance of doubt. Doubt being the skeptical doubt that the path does lead to fruition. If you've had the direct experience of fruition, then that doubt is eradicated because you have the experience. The second path is called once returner, which refers to the number of times that you're reincarnated if you take that path. The first path, stream entry, it said that you reincarnate only 7 more times. Understand, in the Buddhist cosmology, you've been reincarnated countless times, that you've stepped on every square inch of the earth, that everyone has been your mother, been your father, been your child, been your brother, been your sister, because there's been so many iterations, so many reincarnations. But when you get to the second path, you're a once returner, which means only one more life, one more reincarnation. Remember that this is the cessation of the path of suffering, and what that means is it's the cessation of rebirth and death, the cycle of rebirth and death. So the purpose in the Theravada path is to end the cycle of rebirth, which you do through the attaining these stages of liberation. This is different than the Mahayana path, where you take the Bodhisattva vow to be reincarnated until all sentient beings are liberated. But in the Theravada path, it really is just your personal liberation that leads to the end of your own suffering, and there isn't that attention to all of us together in it. In the second path, you weaken craving and aversion, but you don't eradicate it. And in the third path, non-returner, you're no longer reincarnated, you eliminate craving and aversion. I think what's interesting to pay attention to in American Buddhism, and particularly in the Theravada world, an open discussion of your own attainments is quite common, even though in the more traditional Asian practices, it's considered really bad manners to do that. So in that sort of American thing about being, you know, recklessly open or forcefully open. When I went to Myanmar, I like to travel with somebody who can speak the language. It's very difficult. I don't really even know the alphabet, the Myanmar alphabet, and when you get outside of the main cities, none of the signs are in English. They're only in the Myanmar language. So I like to travel with somebody who speaks the language. And he was telling me that when they train people to be guides, that you have to learn the culture of the people that you're guiding because they're so distinct. So, for instance, Americans demand that you tell them intimate details about your family life and what your experience of being alive is and what your relationships are like. And that if you're unwilling to express that, which is not the typical culture of Miramar, they feel offended that you haven't said it to them, and the relationship doesn't work in terms of you being successful in guiding them through the country. But that if you were to make the mistake of doing that with of being open and revealing to people from Germany, they would be offended by it because that isn't their culture. They don't do that, and they expect you to withhold that information from them, and if they inquire about it, that it be very limited and not particularly intimate. And so he was describing to me how it's almost like getting certified in the type of culture that you're going to guide, because they're so different. And so, for instance, people from Spain and people from America are similar enough that that would be a common grouping. You'd be a guide for people from America, and you'd be a guide from people from Spain, but you probably wouldn't be a guide for people from Germany or some of the northern countries there. Forgetting why I wanted to talk about that. I know. One of the things that I think is interesting to understand about practice and what practice tends to lead to, particularly in the American culture where we're forthright and claim attainments, is that often the claims aren't reliable, or the understanding of the person isn't complete enough for them to really know whether they're there or not. And so it's useful to have a dialogue with a teacher who can investigate with you your understanding of what's coming up in the practice and what that actually means. But then also to understand how that would be experienced, what shifts in consciousness, what shifts in awareness you would expect to see in somebody who had the attainments, whether they claim they have them or they don't claim it, so that you have a sense of where they're at. So you really know the terrain of the kind of practice that you do and where it tends to lead, so that you can navigate it. So the eradication of craving and aversion is an interesting point for non-returners. I've met many people that have had stream entry in the classical sense, and the effects of that. One of the effects that's quite common is you have stream entry and then you're plunged into the most intense experience of craving, the most intense experience of aversion, and you work tirelessly to weaken them because they're the intensity of the experiences so has such an effect on your ordinary life. So the weakening of craving and aversion is something that's identifiable, and I see that quite often too. But I can't really say that I've ever experienced somebody who's completely eradicated craving and aversion. It still seems to come up. And then the fourth path in the Theravada model is the eradication of the remaining 5 fetters. So restlessness and agitation, the craving for material existence, the craving for immaterial existence, and then the last one is the hindrance of conceit. Christian?
Do you think that all of these fetters are like conceptualized in a way that makes sense to think that householders should be getting rid of them, or is this really something that's like particular for monastics? And I guess I'm wondering about your opinion for like, should someone really strive to get rid of all of these things, or is this something, or is this some of this stuff more appropriate for like a monastic?
I haven't noticed the monastic population being any better at this than the householder population.
I guess what I'm wondering is, does eradicating some of these fetters actually, could it make someone less capable at sort of making their way in the world?
It's an interesting question. It could make you less caught up in the social valuing of activities in the world, and more interested in actually what's satisfying, what actually has value and meaning. And most of the time, I would guess that is away from what's valued in our culture. And so, your experience and the experience of people that are valuing of the traditional pathways of success in our culture might be quite different. They might, see that you're slacking or uninterested in things that they find very important and necessary.
Well, I'm already slacking, so I think better.
This also points in the direction of who comes to practice, which I also think is kind of interesting. When I first started teaching, this was very pronounced, and I didn't really know how to manage it. So it created chaos and conflict in all of the classes I taught, which was this bell curve of people's capacities. And at one end was people who hardly functioned, who were coming to practice because their suffering was so great, and they were in some sense, because meditation was so far out of the mainstream, grasping at straws for anything that would help them. And at the other end of the spectrum was these super accomplished people that went after things and got them over and over again. The people in the middle didn't come because they were still engaged in the ordinary activity of family and career and advancement. The people at the very accomplished end of things weren't any happier, and yet they had been able to achieve all of the things that conventional society said would make them happy, and they still weren't. And the people at the lower end couldn't get into the game to see whether it could make them happy. Stas?
Just following up on Christian's comment with the I just, transitioning in life and going from doing a lot of retreats to maybe doing one a year or less. And, now all of a sudden this whole endeavor seems quite, out of reach.
Mm. So after my stream entry experience, I left my career and took a dopey job, but I could go on 4 retreats a year if I kept that job, and I couldn't if I kept my career. And I thought that I would rather explore this than my career, which wasn't that meaningful to me. And so, I worked in movies anyway, and I did that for about 5 years or so, and then. And that was enough. And then started to do other things as my desire to explore other things arose. I think also the vagaries of our economy, without the recession in 2007 and 8, I wouldn't be a meditation teacher because I wouldn't have needed to. So it's, you go along with your life and it takes you in different directions, and can you be present for it and understand it? When I first started teaching, I would give the instructions for the class, and in the next class, the super achievers would have done everything many, many times, really had a good sense of it, and the people who barely functioned would have done very little of it and not really be able to function. And the impatience of the people that functioned well, because they wanted to go faster and faster and faster, and we would leave behind the people that couldn't function very well. And so there was that conflict. It seemed unfair to each group that they would be burdened with the qualities of the other group. You have your life, and what's important is that you turn your attention to your life and to the things that are interesting and meaningful to you, and that you're able as a householder to put together a structure that supports that, so that you can explore and find these things out that you need to know, so that you find meaningfulness in this. And I think that if you practice quite a bit, it removes a lot of the imposition that our society has in the way that it values things, and you can shift into uh, touching what is actually meaningful to you. I'm going to be 68 this year, and I've been through different periods in my life where a lot of the people that I know have died. So in my teen years, it was mainly drunken driving and overdoses and suicide. Those are the big 3 experiences of death. And then in my 20s, AIDS was the big thing, and that was an amazing change to the sense of possibility, and then in my 30s, we all got very interested in succeeding at something and finding meaning in that, and then that carried us into our 40s, and the opioid epidemic came up, and that also started that process of a lot of people dying, and seeing, the structures of society that support that as a kind of population control. But now at this age, what's beginning to happen is that the people that I've known for decades, who are a little older than me, are beginning to die of old age. It's quite a startling change in the perspective of things. So people that I met in my 20s are now in their 70s, and My friend said to me, I was so outraged that I got cancer. And then I realized it was a normal lifespan. It wasn't early. It wasn't premature in any way. It's what happens to most people. And so it sets in an idea about the temporary nature of things that it's hard to really come into earlier than that. The nature of the body aging. I think that if you can tune into the things that make life really interesting, really meaningful, then the indignities of aging don't bother you so much because you're really interested in continuing on with your exploration, and you accommodate the gradual limiting. I was talking to my friend Vincent, and he had eye surgery, and they removed one of the lenses, but they only did one eye at a time. You know, with cataract surgery, they put a lens in and then you can see. And he says that if he opens one eye, it's like a platinum print. It's just radiant and clear. And then if he closes that eye and opens the other eye, it's like a sepia, sort of romantic, total different color spectrum, which he just had assumed was the way it was because the eye changes so slowly that the filtering of the lens with cataract in it completely changes anything. And then he said what was really cool was to open both eyes at the same time and watch the mind wrestle with how to create conceptual reality from the two very different inputs, which is really quite an interesting understanding of the nature of all of this, right? We create these experiences based on the sense data that we get. And when we live long enough, the quality of the sense data changes as the quality of the body changes. And because it's so incremental, we hardly notice it until there's an abrupt shift. What matters to you? And can you organize your life in such a way that you spend most of your time, or as much of your time as you can, engaged in that? That's what I think this process of liberation is. And that it's easy to get sidetracked on ideas of what it is and not touch into that quality. What do you say we do a little bit of meditation? So I was thinking maybe that we would do some loving kindness practice, beginning with an easy person and then shifting into practice for self. Everybody settled into the meditation, no questions? So how did that go? Good enough? Christian?
I get like what I believe is really into the mind state, like my face, it almost feels like it hurts. Like I think I'm like smiling, but does that mean I need to back up and find a more relaxed kind of way of doing it, or is that just part of
Is it muscle pain or is it energy?
feels like my face is just like stretched out, but maybe I'm kind of maybe I don't have clarity like with the energy, like how you can kind of have a headache when you're concentrated, but when you like stop meditating, it goes away. It's not like a real headache. So it's, I don't know.
So a lot of people report that the PT is contractive. And so you have this intense contractive energy because the views are often associated with seeing. They're often up sort of in the upper part of the lower part of the forehead or around the eyes. And a lot of people report almost like a contractive spot where the third eye would be as an experience of energy. That would be different than, say, of the physical effort of holding a smile or something like that. And that you just attempt to come into equanimity with, and then if you do, it begins to be a more, there tends to be more movement to it, so it's less distressing to hold. But there needs to be a little bit more clarity there.
Mm-hmm.
Someone else? All right. Thank you all for coming. Oops. Juliet.
It's me, unfortunately. Julia's screaming in the background. I don't know what's up with her, but is it okay to do this practice but address yourself in the third person?
How do you mean? May you?
I'm sorry, not in the second person, not like you. Yeah, not third person. Sorry, I meant the second person. Like I find it easier to, instead of saying like may I just feels like really self-indulgent. You say that. It's just like,
So-
but if I imagine myself, it's still myself, but just like, like I'm seeing myself and I say that to myself, like that works so much better.
Okay. Yeah, that's totally fine. It is in some ways an insight into the nature of self, since you're not identified directly with the experience. You're more in a viewing of experience, and then that creates a separate, a different experience of self than one that you would personally identify with. So that's totally fine.
So but does that make a difference though in the results or
No.
like in the effect?
No, the intention is still the same. The object of meditation is the mind state, and everything else drifts into the background except for the awareness of the view. And so even the sense of who you're intending it for drifts into the background as you become more and more concentrated.
Okay, thank you.
Someone else? All right. So Saturday we don't have a day long, but on the following Saturday we have the third of the 3 days on the level 1, and then 2 weeks from there we have the meditation and attachment for relationships class, which is about collaborative relationship skills. In September we're starting a level 2 class, and so registration for both of those are up on the website. We're going to have an in-person retreat in December for a week, December 26th to January 1st. There's, I think, 12 spots left in that. We opened the registration this week, so it's filling up quickly. If you're interested in that, take a look at that. That's also there on the website. I offer the class on a Dana basis, which means I teach the class freely, but I'm hoping that you'll make a donation to help support me and also the work that Mettagroup is doing. There's links to make a donation to us on the website or in the email that you may have received. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate your practice, and we'll see you again soon, I hope, somewhere on the path. Bye now.